It's up to you.
Do we want to wait for a few more people, or where you can start?
It's up to you.
Introduce you. All right. Well, good evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Catholic Information Center. I'm Angelica Tom, the Senior Director of Operations here at the CIC. We're delighted to have you, and please welcome the Bennetts and their daughter, Lianna Bennett Haider. So today we'll start off with their talk, and there'll be a nice time for a pithy Q&A, which will be followed by a light happy hour afterwards. So we're just delighted that you can join us both here or if you're through the live stream. I just wanted to introduce this wonderful family, and the book is Anxiety, A Catholic Guide to Freedom from Worry and Fear. And I'm sure since we're all in DC, we have plenty of that, or we're surrounded by it from other people. However, there's good news, and it's in this book. Art Bennett has a BA in philosophy and an MA in clinical counseling. I don't know what I'm reading here. Counseling psychology from the Santa Clara University. He has co-authored 3 books on temperament and 7 books altogether with Laraine, his beautiful wife, and is a licensed marriage and family therapist for more than 35 years with more than 35 years of clinical experience. Currently practicing at Bennett Consulting and Therapy, LLC. For 10 years, he was the president and CEO of the Catholic Charities of the Catholic Diocese of Arlington. And he was co-founder and director of the Alpha Omega Clinics in Northern Virginia and Maryland for 8 years. And he is currently the vice president on international mental health with SAIC for 15 years. His beautiful wife, Laraine Bennett, has a BA in philosophy from Santa Clara University and an MA in philosophy from the University of California, Santa Barbara. She created the brand new game, Know Thyself, which is, by the way, on sale here at the CIC. It's Know Thyself, the game of temperaments, and she has written 2 solo books, The Little Way of Living with Less, Learning to Let Go with the Little Flower, and A Year of Grace, 365 reflections for caregivers. And also, they've been married for 48 years, so they do know a thing or two here about a happy marriage and a beautiful family. Yeah, all the Bennetts, everybody, I'm a Bennett. They're all happy. They've been walking in. It's great. So it's just changing the atmosphere here. And their daughter, Dr. Lianna Bennett Haider, is a licensed clinical psychologist with over 15 years of clinical experience and a private practice located in Alexandria, Virginia. She obtained her BA in psychology from the Catholic University of America and her PsyD from Regent University. Her therapy practice focuses on helping clients to heal past traumas, reduce their experiences of depression and anxiety, and improve the quality of the relationships in their lives. She lives in Virginia with her husband and her children. But it is our pleasure to welcome Art and Laraine Bennett and Lianna Bennett Haider.
Thank you, Angelica. We want to thank CIC Director Father Trujos, saw earlier, and also the chaplain, Father Paul Kais, and for inviting us here tonight. We also want to thank Sophia Institute Press, our publishing company. They've published this book and many others, and we're very grateful for our partnership with them. And we want to thank all of you for coming out here and being online to this topic of anxiety. So we'll talk about that. Also, I want to acknowledge my son Ray is here, right, and my son-in-law Stephen. So that's very important because I'm a therapist and she's a psychologist, and these guys actually make money. So they are the retirement plan for us. So we're very grateful that you guys would come. That's really great. No, they're very helpful, and Stephen was very understanding. He had to watch the 2 kids while Lianna was doing her writing, and very grateful for both of them being here too. Okay, why did we write this book? Well, I've been a marriage therapist for 38 years, and Lianna is a psychologist for the last 14 or so. And we were talking with Laraine about the increased number of people from all walks of life that come into therapy and the preponderance of anxiety. I mean, obviously, if you're a therapist, you're doing therapy, your anxiety is going to walk in the door all the time, but we were kind of struck by how much anxiety we were seeing in our clinical lives. And so studies show that 1 out of 3 adults will actually get the diagnosis of anxiety, a clinical diagnosis of anxiety, which is not that easy to get. I mean, you have to have a lot of worry, a lot of unease. You have to be kind of concerned about future threats, brain fog, fatigue, irritable, and all this has to last 6 months or more to get a clinical diagnosis. But we were just seeing much more of it than we'd ever seen. But what we were noticing is how many people we see outside the counseling world, just in our daily lives, who seem to be so anxious, and how people were just discussing things like panic attacks, like they were discussing the weather or something. You see, like a big change from our neighbors to parishioners to family members to colleagues at work, as well as friends and even enemies, were frequently saying, "I'm overwhelmed," not "I'm busy," "I'm overwhelmed," or "I'm burned out." I'm burnt out, which is like a word 30 years ago you might have heard every blue moon, just like you hear several times a day. "I'm drowning. I'm drowning. My life is so unbelievably stressful. I need to quit this and stop that just to survive." It's a part of almost everyday discourse. So this kind of a double hit. In the clinical sessions, anxiety walks in the room before the clients do. In the daily life, people are talking about anxiety like it's a normal thing to do. So anyhow, I'm a phlegmatic melancholic, which only tells you that I'm not very inspiring. But anyhow, I was talking casually to Laraine and made a slight suggestion. Of course, when I make a suggestion, it's just a suggestion. I don't want to do anything about it. I'm just talking. And that it might be interesting to share some of the new neuroscience insights that are really brand new since the year 2000 and not kind of out in the culture, along with the wisdom of the saints, a long venerable history of the Catholic Church about how to overcome anxiety and complacency around there. So to be honest, I didn't really intend to do anything with it. We're just talking. And Lianna seemed pretty excited about it, but she's got 2 babies. And I said, I'm not likely to do anything there. I mean, she's too busy. But when Laraine gets excited, then the caloric wheels start turning. And I knew I better tighten my seatbelt, because one day she asked us, hey Lianna, do you guys really want to do a book about this? And we said, yeah, sure. She goes, good, because I already contacted Sophia and we have a contract, so let's go. So that's how it works. So it's best to keep my ideas to myself. Anyhow, so we did that. And it was really great, a great experience. And Laraine is a great writer and a great editor. But because anxiety is so common and very destructive, and there's no reason to be complacent about it. So that's kind of what we were thinking. Why are people so complacent with this terrible thing? And maybe there's some things that we could write about that might be helpful. We don't want to be, but on the hand, we don't want to be anxious about anxiety either. So we don't want to ignore it, but we don't want to be anxious about it. And like Christ said in John's Gospel 16:33, since you're all Catholics, when I say John 16:33, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Right? Okay. In this world, we will have trouble. Christ said, in this world, we're going to have trouble. So that's not unusual, but take courage, because I have conquered the world. One last thing, Pat Fagan of CUA and Family Research Council fame, I don't know if you know him, good guy. He gave a talk once, I always remember. He said, the Catholics never need to worry about anything in science that's true. That is, the Catholic faith is just truth-friendly. So there's been some great research on neuroscience related to anxiety, so we write about some of it in our book, and it's Catholic-friendly. Anyhow, now I'm going to shift it to Laraine, and she'll tell you her take on what we did and why we did it. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, okay. Laraine Bennett. Laraine Bennett, here we go.
Therefore, I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, Christ tells us. And how many times he tells us, be not afraid. The saints also reiterate the refrain. St. Paul says to the Philippians, have no anxiety at all. St. Francis de Sales said, anxiety is the greatest evil that can happen to a person, save only sin. Now, does that mean then that I'm not a good Christian if I have anxiety? Not at all. Even the saints had anxiety. And I'm going to name just a few who suffered from anxiety. Saint Therese of Lisieux, doctor of the church, suffered greatly after her mother died when she was very young. And she was sent to a boarding school where then she was shunned by the other girls and suffered a lot. She was then her older sister, Pauline, who had become her second mother after her mom died, she left to go to the convent. Well, she became severely ill with what they called a nervous disease until she was miraculously cured by the Blessed Mother. Therese herself believed that she had suffered a demonic attack. I'm convinced it was the work of the devil, she later wrote, though today we would likely say it was depression and anxiety. Brother Lawrence of the Resurrection suffered from anxiety, depression, and a deep fear that he wouldn't be saved. He began to practice a form of what today we might call mindfulness, which Lianna will talk about next. Rather than ruminating about the past or worrying about the future, Brother Lawrence began to focus his attention on loving and serving God in the present moment. He wrote, "If the vessel of our soul is tossed with winds and storms, let us awake the Lord who reposes in it, and he will quickly calm the sea." St. Alphonsus Liguori used to go from confessor to confessor in Naples, looking for a priest who would give him a different answer or reassurance about the state of his soul. And this was a sign of scrupulosity, which is a form of anxiety. Now, because he suffered from it so severely, he dealt with it very thoroughly and practically in his way of salvation and of perfection. And interestingly enough, it's the order that he founded, the Redemptorists, who developed the very popular 10 Commandments for the scrupulous. And perhaps St. Francis de Sales' excellent treatment of anxiety is in part related to the fact that his spiritual daughter, St. Jane Frances de Chantal, suffered severely from it herself. He likens it to a bird caught in a net. The more the bird struggles to get out of the net, to free itself, the more entangled it becomes. And the more we seek to free ourselves from anxiety or to avoid all the triggers or whatever it is that we're afraid of, the more anxious and more caught in that net we become. De Sales' solution is to examine yourself often, at least morning and evening, to make sure your soul is in your hand, by which he means having a calm, restful spirit, a calm attentiveness to the present moment. In his book, The Christian and Anxiety, Hans Urs von Balthasar says that we are experiencing today anxiety to an unprecedented degree because we're now immersed in a culture that is having an existential crisis of faith. So we struggle not only with existential anxiety, he says, but also sin anxiety, secular anxiety, Christian anxiety, and psychological anxiety. And yet, Christ came to conquer all evil, including anxiety. As von Balthasar says, anxiety is one of the authorities, powers, and dominions over which the Lord triumphed on the cross and which he carried off captive and placed in chains. He took on all anxiety, fear, and abandonment that we can experience in this world, to the point of sweating blood in the agony in the garden. He took on absolute anxiety, which is the source of all other forms of anxiety, according to von Balthasar. But he took it upon himself for our sakes, so that we may, as we say at every Mass, be safe from all distress. Pope Benedict wrote, "He brings the world's anguished cry before the heart of God himself." And in this suffering, in solidarity with all the suffering of the world, past, present, and future, he also contains within it the certainty of God's answer. That is, our hope is already present within his passion and death. Christ does not abolish all anxiety. In this world, you will have trouble, because part of the human condition is living in a fallen, sinful, and anxious world. But he entered into it to transform it by his grace and his presence. And therefore, we can also have hope then that our anxiety can be transformed in Christ. So when we pray at every Mass that we be free from sin and safe from all distress, we're praying to be free from sin, but safe from all distress. In other words, the distress isn't going away, but we are going to be safe when we are with Christ, when we allow him to enter into our suffering, our distress, our anxiety, and our fears. When we allow him to lead us, and when we're open to his grace. Von Balthasar proposed that the solution to existential anxiety, which we experience as we become aware of the impossible chasm between us and God, is not to turn away from that terrifying abyss, but rather to turn toward it and to look into the face of Christ. And indeed, this is what contemporary neuroscientists actually say is the solution for overcoming anxiety, to lean into it, to face it. And now Lianna is going to tell us, she's going to talk about what happens in the brain and the body when we're experiencing anxiety, and what are some practical solutions.
So anxiety is a life-saving tool. The ability for our body to experience fear, to send off these alarm bells, for heart racing, skin feeling clammy, this feeling of needing to run away from something fearful. This is this function in our body, in our brain, to help us save our life. Deep in our brain is our amygdala. It's the structure of our brain that is designed to help us fight, flight, and freeze, to literally save our life. Basically, if our ancestors hadn't had a working amygdala, we wouldn't be here right now. That's the part of the brain that would see, your neighbor get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger and would decide the saber-toothed tigers are not safe, and next time we see them, we want to run, and we want to be able to run fast. So the amygdala will, charge up our body to be able to run from the thing that could kill us. So this is super helpful if our life is at risk. None of us would be here now if we hadn't had ancestors with working amygdalas. There are some people whose amygdalas don't work terribly well. They do things like free climbing, and base jumping. And so generally speaking, having an amygdala that works is helpful. Having an amygdala that is overactive may be less helpful to us. And that seems to be part of what is going on in people who struggle with anxiety to whatever degree, is that we have this part of our brain that is designed to help us save our life, but it can be overactive and it can be a little bit out of control even. So one of the ways that we can, our brain, we know now, is not just this static thing, but can be very plastic. We can change the way our brain responds to things. We can grow certain parts of our brain by what we do or don't do. And the best way that we can communicate to our brain is through our body and our actions. Sometimes, especially with anxiety, we can often experience a lot of anxious thoughts, thoughts about ourselves, about our world. And sometimes we can try to argue with our thoughts, but that doesn't usually change the way we feel in the moment. And so one of the ways that we try to communicate to our brain is through our bodies and through our actions. One of those is the very simple process of breathing. When we are in danger, when we're running for our life, how is our body going to be, right? Like we're probably, we're going to be breathing quickly, and part of that is to get oxygen to the brain and pulling and oxygen to the limbs to run quickly. So this is a life-saving mechanism that we have. But if we are not actually in danger for our life, perhaps we just got an email from our boss and it's creating some anxiety in our body, how do we tell ourselves, how do we tell our brain that this is not actually something to be fearful of? Well, it's our response to that. So sometimes what happens is we get an email, it's from our boss. We have not had a good relationship. Maybe there's a project that we're working on and we've been delaying addressing it. So we feel some anxiety rising in our body. And so we say, I'm going to answer it later. I'm going to deal with it later. I don't want to think about it right now. And then we feel this momentary relief, like, oh, okay, good. Like I walked away from the computer. The computer was making me anxious. Maybe it was that. So I go do something else. I may have a cup of coffee or something. And what happens is it seems harmless, but our brain learns, yes, maybe there was something to fear in that email. And now I feel better because I walked away from it. But I think we all know that that didn't make the situation actually better, because somewhere in the back of our mind, we're still sitting and thinking about that thing that we have to do, and I don't feel any less worried about it. I'm just ignoring it. And so we go sit back down, and maybe there's another email, and now we're even more anxious, and now we avoid again. And again, we feel a slight dip in that anxiety as we remove ourselves. Avoidance, it's a great technique for dealing with anxiety. It's just not actually going to help us overcome it. And so the more we do that, then what happens is our amygdala literally changes. The more we engage in these anxiety responses, the stronger the amygdala gets. It goes, wow, yes, that was the saber-toothed tiger that we just saved ourselves from by walking away from our computer and not answering that email. The amygdala gets a little bit stronger. The anxiety response gets a little stronger. Those anxiety bells that it sends through our body ring a little louder. So the only way we can push back against that is by stepping into that place of anxiety, of teaching our body that this thing that is creating this isn't going to kill us. This isn't going to do us grave harm and grave damage. And so we have to learn techniques of stepping into that anxiety. And there's different degrees to which we can do that. There's, again, the email. Okay, so you just force yourself to sit down and send the response. But there can be other things that are bigger than that are maybe harder. So maybe even just forcing ourselves to sit and think about the response that we're going to send. Maybe that's one step closer to doing that feared action. Or even sometimes just sitting with that feeling of anxiety, trying to notice, what am I feeling in my body? Where am I feeling it? And that's where noticing our body, noticing what we're feeling, noticing our anxiety is one of the most helpful things that we can do, because everything about anxiety and our limbic system is all about avoidance. And again, if it's a saber-toothed tiger, you want to avoid. If it's something that could kill us, you want to avoid. If it is something to actually truly fear that could harm us, yeah, we may not want to go into that. But if it's something that we think maybe might lead to something, these thoughts that often start with the phrase, what if? But what if this happens? Or, but what if they're mad at me? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I do the wrong thing? These types of thoughts, when we engage in avoidance, our brain learns, yes, perhaps I was right about that. Yeah, what if? Look at all the disasters we've avoided, says our amygdala. So we want to learn, though, we want to learn that not every time the alarm is going off in our body does it mean that we are in danger. So some of us who have perhaps an overactive amygdala, it might be like having a fire alarm in the building that goes off like a hair trigger. And when a fire alarm goes off, it should be an aversive experience, right? A fire alarm is designed to get your attention, for you to notice it, for you to hear it, and to kickstart you into action, to doing something. But so if the fire alarm went off in this building, what are we supposed to do? The first step is to pause, even just for a moment, and observe. Do we see a fire? You know, is there any sign of smoke coming anywhere? But what does the amygdala want us to do? It doesn't want us to do that. It wants us to stampede out the building, jump, clawing over each other to get out of here first. And what can happen is if we all just listen to our amygdalas, someone would get hurt. But it wouldn't necessarily be because of a fire in the building. It would be because, of these just rash actions. So even if there's a fire, what did we all learn in grade school? Fire drills, filing out carefully, orderly fashion. So even if there is a fire, even if the building's on fire, we still want to act. We want to respond and not just react to our amygdala. So even when it is a life-threatening situation, we don't necessarily just want to let our amygdala, send us jumping out of the window of a building. There might be some situations you're high up, maybe there actually is a fire. Maybe that is the situation, but it's rare that the amygdala is right that you should be jumping out that window. So learning to pause in the anxiety, to assess the situation. How in danger am I actually right now, amygdala? What is the actual threat level? What is the actual threat in this moment? And in that pausing, in that pause, we can communicate to our body, we are not in imminent danger. I am in control, not the amygdala. I am in control. There's more to me, my brain, than just my amygdala. So we pause, we take a moment. Maybe we even take a breath. Maybe we take more than just one. Breathing is one of those autonomic responses of our body that our body just does it for us. It's very kind of it, right? We breathe when we're sleeping. We don't have to worry about that. But it's also one of those things where we can choose to do it. It is also something where we can pause. We can hold our breath, but not for forever. Our body's going to kickstart that again. We can take measured breaths. And what we can do through our breathing is, if our brain is freaking out that we are not safe and our breathing is starting to get a little out of control or erratic, when we breathe intentionally, we can start to slowly communicate back up to our brain, maybe I'm not in danger right now. Maybe I don't need to be running for my life right now. So this is, the idea of breathing is something that, I'm not talking about like yoga breathing here or anything, but really just being in the present moment, sitting where you're at, and just allowing yourself to notice and breathe in a way that is regular. And just maybe noticing the way that it feels to breathe the air in and out of your body. And in doing that, trying to to communicate to your brain, you're safe right now. I am safe right now in this moment. We can also use the present moment, use our awareness of it, our awareness of our self and our body in the moment, because so much of our anxiety is not about what's happening right here, right now. Some of us in this room might be feeling anxious, but we're all fine. No, everyone here is safe right now. Nothing bad is happening to anybody here. Now, some of us might be thinking anxious thoughts, but what about this? What if, there's bad traffic out there? How am I going to get home? Did I park my car legally? We might be, there's plenty of what if thoughts we could be thinking that could be making us anxious. But that's the key, is that so much of anxiety is not actually about the threat that is happening to me right now, but about the what ifs, something that may happen, that may occur at some point in the future. Maybe it's 5 minutes from now, or an hour from now, or a week from now, or 2 weeks from now. But our brain is not here in this moment, because right now, we're all okay. But And so how do we tell our body that? How do we communicate that to our anxious mind that is always thinking, planning 2, 5, 15 steps ahead? Well, we notice the moment. We, use our 5 senses, which God gave us, to literally physically be in this moment, be here. We use our sense of touch to feel ourselves sitting in the chair that we're sitting in. We use our sense of sight to connect us to physically things that we see around us. Maybe try to find something beautiful or different that we haven't seen or noticed before. Using our sense of touch, holding on to the chair that we're sitting in, maybe to literally remind us that we are just here in this moment. And then sometimes those senses that we don't engage as much, is there anything that I can smell in the room around me? This is a wonderful practice in chapel. Can I smell, the incense? What sounds do I hear? And just trying to engage all of these different senses and grounding our body into the present moment. Because usually the present moment's not so bad, maybe even a little bit boring. But if you struggle with anxiety, just being bored is sometimes a treat. So just knowing that often when we are particularly troubled by anxiety, we're not here in this room in this moment. Our mind is somewhere off in the future, what ifs and worries and fearful things. And so if we can just reel our thoughts back into this moment, notice where we're at, that can start to bring us a little bit of a sense of maybe even peace. There's another technique that we can use. So being present, being in the moment, and this is more of a cognitive technique. It's called reframing, where we try to think about things differently. And where this is important is because sometimes helping us think about something differently can then help us buy into some of the hard behavioral stuff that we'll need to do. So I'll let my dad talk about reframing because he's got some good examples.
I wish I had that calm approach you had. She got that? I don't know if she got that. Man.
No?
Thank you, Lianna. Yeah, I think what Lianna says about the breathing and the pausing, reframing is more of a cognitive way of looking at things, but it's real intentional. It's looking at things rationally without rushing into threat mode. In other words, you're trying to bypass the amygdala, which really only knows threat modes. So you calmly and reflectively take a deeper look, maybe a truer look, at what's really going on in your life, rather than see things as obstacles or see the email as another indication my boss is a jerk, or seeing this Wednesday meeting as a complete waste of time. You try to reframe these things into, well, these are challenges for me. Threats are amygdala, challenges the prefrontal cortex, which has so many options. All of a sudden you go from fight, flight, and freeze into this new land of, oh, let me think, what can I do about this? So reframing is intentionally putting a frame around a situation and seeing it as a challenge for growth, rather than an indication that life sucks and I'm overwhelmed. An opportunity for me to grow. Instead of reacting with fight, flight, or freeze, how can I respond to this in a more creative way? I'll give you a quick example. Working in the Diocese of Arlington, Bishop Burbidge had a men's conference. At the men's conference, we get 600 guys there, and he gives his homily, and he always seems to enjoy that conference a lot. And so he always likes to give us advice. Bishops like to give advice. Anyhow, so it was early Lent, and in his homily he said, I want to challenge you guys. Right away when he says that, you're out of the amygdala. You're going to challenge these guys. He's already kind of getting us out. And what's the challenge, Bishop? What do you got? This kind of thing. He says, oh, what was happening is people were going back to work in Virginia, and we have a reputation for horrible traffic. Well, D.C. is pretty close. But anyhow, we have a reputation for horrible traffic, and he would just say, how about this, guys? How about instead of every time you're in traffic jam, every time you're going slow, rather than go, this stinks, I hate it, this is terrible, I'm off, I'm going to miss this, I'm going to miss that. He says, see it as an opportunity to be patient. You have the slow traffic, the honking horns. I could practice patience right now. And you can. In fact, it's a great golden opportunity to do that. Just reframe it these next 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 15 minutes. Bring in the breathing Lianna talked about. So maybe a patient guy, not a pissed off guy. Actually, talk about reframing. I think actually Catholics, kind of close on this, Catholics use reframing all the time. We see and experience this broken world, the vale of tears, as an opportunity to grow in sanctity and holiness. We see the crucifix not just as a horrible execution, but the way we can be forgiven, receive grace, and be eligible for eternal life. That's how we see it. That's how we choose to see it. We can see the rounded white wafer as the body and blood of Christ. People call us crazy, but that's what we believe. That's how we see it. And it makes all the difference in the world. And yet yesterday's gospel teaches us, while the guards were around the tomb, they saw the angels rolling away the stone. Source of confusion and fear. They had to go see the Jewish elders and figure out a scheme and bribing and all sorts of stuff. High anxiety and trouble, But we can just see it as it really was. The resurrection of Christ transforming everything and everyone. So anyhow, we enjoyed this opportunity to write this book. I hope it can be helpful to some people in some situations. And that's all we have to say. We welcome your questions if you have any. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Great. So we'll take questions for the next 20 minutes. Just raise your hand and I'll come with you with this microphone.
Thanks. Thanks so much. That was great. I read the book and I loved it. I recommend it to everybody. But it raised one question for me. If the amygdala in our fear and anxiety partially shuts down the prefrontal cortex so that our thinking gets blurry, what about anger, which also does the same thing? Is that the amygdala working as well?
You get the tough questions. Go.
Yeah.
So anger can be anger is a response to a perceived injustice generally. Now that can also be it depends on maybe what's triggering it, but certainly anger and anxiety are often linked together. So perhaps in somebody's anxious desire for control, something happens that disrupts that. When we're angry, when we are angry, our frontal cortex is not online. So it depends on how that anger is manifesting. So just as anxiety and fear, sometimes fear is appropriate, sometimes it's life-saving. The same with anger. Sometimes anger is very appropriate to a situation if there is a grave injustice that has occurred. But it depends on the manifestation of that. What do we do with that anger? How are we responding or are we just reacting to it? So flying off the handle and yelling and screaming is rarely the appropriate response. And so, if we find ourselves in a situation where either we are the ones responding in anger or we're being responded to in anger, I think that then we probably have to look at ourselves and you figure out, what's going on in those situations,
But is it the amygdala that's firing that seeing red?
Because it could be because that fight response, right? Because fight, flight, and freeze are all coming from the amygdala, and so sometimes I think that fight response comes out as anger. Yeah.
But the amygdala also, it's really an alarm system. It's really all it is. We teach it what to be alarmed about. It's not a good counsel for what to do about it. Like even Lianna, I love Lianna's example. Even when there's a fire, you don't just jump out the third floor window. You take a look, let me assess what's going on here, and let me figure out what I need to do. So the amygdala doesn't give good counsel about what to do. It only has the fight, flight, or freeze. So you want to get out of it and say, okay, here's an alarm. Is this another one of those smoke alarms that like 99% of them go nowhere. Oh, there's an alarm outside. Someone's breaking into a car. Maybe. Well, I've never seen that. But so that part of it just overrides it, because that's. So the amygdala will tell you something's amiss, but it doesn't tell you. It's not a good counsel about what to do. My kid just talked to me disrespectfully, so I need to let him have it with a screaming. Oh, maybe. Maybe that'll be good. Show him the only thing you didn't do, he didn't yell loud enough. So it doesn't give good counsel. So something to break it into 2 steps. I'm feeling scared or nervous or upset. Now let me figure out what I'm going to do. And usually a pause will help get you a better solution. And then you're kicking it up to the prefrontal cortex. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. At the beginning, you had mentioned the word depression. And so I'm wondering what the relationship is between depression and anxiety. Just because for me, during COVID, at one point, I was feeling very depressed. And I thought, well, at least anxiety was more exciting. So to me, they seem like 2 different things. And I wonder if you could tell me the relationship or talk a little bit about the relationship.
I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah. Psychologist. Side me.
So
The doctor.
depression, I feel like depression and anxiety very much go hand in hand. They're 2 different clinical diagnoses, but they can do different things in the brain, but there is a lot of overlap between like someone who has anxiety, can very easily also have some experience of depression as well. One of the sort of differences that I like to think about when it comes to those 2, one is that there's often like some physical manifestations that are different, right? So anxiety, like we feel it very physically in our body, we can feel like kind of that like pulse racing, hyped up kind of feeling. Depression can sometimes just feel like this like dull, wet blanket where it's like just sucking and removing all joy from life. And so we can feel slow, we can feel sluggish, we can feel tired all the time and still sometimes have trouble sleeping. So physically they can feel a little bit different in the body. And then the way our brain thinks can be a little bit different. So anxiety is often worry about the future, whereas depression can often be more like ruminating about the past. The things that have happened, and again, so where they're similar is that they're not in the present. Neither depression nor anxiety is sitting right here, right now. Again, the anxiety is often worried about future events, and the depression is very much stuck in the past, and that can be wounds from the past, things that have happened that have hurt us. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah.
Hi, so you talked about fight, flight, or freeze. I was wondering more about the freeze because I find myself in situations where I freeze sorry. Like dropping something. Some people get like high reactions where they'll drop something, they'll quickly try to grab it. I find myself just freezing and then just watching it drop. What is there any reason for that? What evolutionary kind of reason for freezes? And is there anything I can do that kind of help in that scenario?
Yeah.
Something like that?
I was thinking it could be temperament related.
Yeah.
I was wondering if, I'm not the doctor here. But I'm going to throw this out there.
Yeah.
Okay, but what if it was related to temperament? In other words, the person, so I happen to be choleric, as which tends to fight. So if I become threatened, I fight back. But another person whose temperament might be phlegmatic, let's say, maybe they freeze because that's more in line with their comfort zone, their tendency to react more subdued or slowly, whereas my reactions are intense and kind of impulsive. So I was just thinking that it could be related to that, but probably in the animal kingdom, I'm sure there were reasons appropriately when you should freeze, when you should or somebody's coming at you with a knife in a dark alley. Maybe that's a freeze situation. I don't know. Unless you're a really good runner and then you could run, but I don't know,
Yeah.
But yeah, there's probably actual reasons for the different responses. But I was thinking that it could be related to temperament as to how some people tend to fight more.
I'm not sure about the research on that specifically, but I would think that we do know that there are sort of people have these very different ingrained responses to them. But then what you might find is that environment might also play a role in that, so we have these maybe initial responses, but then what do we, what does our environment teach us about it? What does it teach us that is helpful versus not helpful?
True.
And I would say if you feel that freeze response, something happens and you just get stuck, that might be the soul system just getting really overwhelmed. And rather than being upset that you have the freeze response, because then you're just getting mad at yourself on top of a response that you can't control, what you want to try to do is figure out how to, if you find yourself in that freeze, how to slowly get unstuck, and the thing about all of this is, how to deal with anxiety is, the good news is it's a skill. We can learn skills to deal with anxiety. And some of us are inherently good at certain types of skills, like playing the piano. I was using this analogy earlier with someone today. I was like, I bet if somebody had taught me how to play the piano, if somebody gave me lessons on how to play the piano, I probably could have been a pretty good piano player. Don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I never learned.
That's too bad. There's nothing you can do about it now, huh?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No. But I could, if I really wanted to, I could probably sit down and try to learn how to play a piano. I would not probably become a concert pianist. Anyone can sit down and learn how to play a piano, but it's going to be a lot easier for people with inherent skill towards it. It's going to be easier for people who learn to play it at a young age. Maybe it's going to be easier for people who learned an adjacent skill, some other musical instrument. Kind of the same with anxiety. Learning these deep breathing, mindfulness, reframing, all of these are skills. And some of us are going to have more of a foundation that's already been laid for that. And others of us will, feel like we're starting from scratch and years late, but these are still skills that can be learned.
I was just saying, just knowing the freeze skill, that's a great thing to know about yourself.
Just knowing that.
When you're going to get in a threatening, difficult situation, you say, so knowledge is power, that's really true. Oh, I know I'm going to be tempted just to freeze and say nothing. So knowing that ahead of time, then just being prepared, I think next time I feel that way, I'm going to ask a few questions. Could you tell me more about that? Or can you give me more background, where you're coming from or whatever? I think that's an invaluable skill. So if you know your kind of go-to move, but it's not really getting you where you want, just get ready for it when it happens. Like Laraine says, she gets kind of angry and wants to kind of hide, or somebody else might want to run away or whatever. So people pleasers. Oh, they say yes to everything. Yeah. So you're working with people pleasing, which is an anxiety response. I want everyone to like me all the time, so I say yes to everything. And just teaching them to go, well, that's a good question. Let me think about it for a day, and I'll get back to you. It's a great move to break that chain. And so same thing with you. Just go, okay, when that happens, I'm just going to maybe ask a few questions and extend it. So that way I'm participatory. I'm not freezing. I'm trying to get more information. So it's great to have that insight, and then you just try those behaviors. Like Lianna said, you practice them, you get better at them. So that's great. Yeah.
So Art, when you started, you talked about how many people seem to be suffering from anxiety, and I think that's truly, at least in my world, the kids especially, the teens, the kids going off to college that you would have thought 10 years ago will just do great when they get there, are suffering from a lot of anxiety, not building the kind of relationships they want. In particular, girls, my daughter and her friends, boy, they know each other's triggers, and they're all talking about their triggers, and they're all talking about their anxiety, and they're getting a lot off the phone. And they know the advice about breathing. In fact, I think she looked like she needed an exorcist when I told her to breathe one time. When I, like, just calm down, breathe. I know, but it doesn't seem to be helping. And I guess it's just sad for, as a parent, it's just very difficult to see someone have that anxiety over what right in front of their face. There's not an event to be running from. There's no tiger. So just advice for parents or friends and how to, besides getting help, which and seeing therapists like yourself, but other thoughts about how to help in the moment, and maybe even friends, how to work with each other. Sometimes I think they can spiral each other down, actually, in the anxiety.
That's a good point.
I think if you're kind of stressed and just don't know what to do, I think a good go-to move would be to figure out how to lean in. So yesterday my son was teaching his 5-year-old daughter how to ride a bike, which is kind of unusual these days. Most parents are skipping that because, you know what, the child might get hurt. So I was watching Ray do his thing. I thought it was great. And she fell a few times. But all the time he was there saying, yeah, you can do it. And okay, let's just try this a little bit better. So he was coaching her all the way through. And then 15 minutes later, she was going up and back and up and back. So she was kind of scared, maybe not terrified of doing it. She probably couldn't have done it on her own. He coached her through it right there by her, identified the thing. So he was really teaching her with his assistants. That was a great job, Ray. With his assistants, I'm going to help you overcome that fear, and you're going to ride a bike, and you're going to love it. Mm-hmm. So I think when our kids are having something that wrapped around the axle on something or whatever, it's not terribly different than when, you know, the 18-month-old doesn't want to go to bed because there's a boogeyman in the closet. So it's time to take the tour of the closet. Flashlights, please, lights on. Let's go. Come on, let's go. Don't better look under the sleeping bag. Let's make sure. And you go all the way through and you go, anywhere else we need to check? I'm going to shut that door. Nothing can get, it's just, let's go after it. But you're going to go after it with me or dad or us. We want to hear more about that. All the time, by the way, they're talking about it, accompanied, to use a great word that Pope Francis used to use a lot. As you're accompanying them through this, you're showing, I think you can get through this, maybe with my help now. But tell me more about what's bothering you. And be fearless about whatever they give you. Oh, wow. So you're worried that you'll be the only girl in the class that doesn't get invited to the prom. Okay, I guess that could happen. But okay, let's talk about that. Let's talk about it. So I think that's the short answer. I mean, there's nuances, Caroline, and stuff. But overall, to run away from something that makes you anxious, like Lianna said, you're going to be more anxious the next time. And so I think as parents, friends, colleagues, let me walk with you on this. Let me see if we can do it together. And maybe it doesn't go away right away or whatever. You're teaching really rather than the runaway with me, babe, with us. Let's take a look at that thing. Oh, okay, it is kind of a hard one. Okay, we can think about it and pray about it a little bit too. Also, you want to, prayer is kind of underrated, overrated, depending on what it is. But our default setting as Catholics is to ask God for our help all the time. So when you see your kids struggling or whatever, don't hesitate to ask or say, why don't we pray about it right now? Let's pray about it right now. It doesn't seem like that's something that should be bothering you. The stage of your life, I get it. It's really bad. I've had things like that happen to me too. I've had things like that happen to me. Is also helpful. You're not alone with this. Yeah. But a part of you just says, let's go after it. Now, sometimes going after it may be see professional, whatever. But I think that's the default setting with anxiety. You run away, it goes worse. You lean into it. Well, you may fall. You may your knees scrape a little bit, but yeah.
Great answer. We can take 2 more questions. The 2 right over here.
So we heard a lot about how the brain functions when you're anxious, and a lot of people have anxiety, and obviously it's getting worse. And you gave us a couple advice, tips like face it and take a deep breath, and have situational awareness. But overall, this is not really enough for me, I have to say. I think anxiety is a much deeper issue. And when you started, one of you said something about, cited the saints. And we as Christians, we should really find another way to deal with that, to have a true solution. What you said, everybody will tell you. Every psychologist will tell you that. And I have been in the hospital work for many years. So this is really not new. But what would be new for me is what you mentioned in the beginning, how we deal with our faith, use our faith as a help to deal with that. Use God, use prayers. And you just mentioned that briefly. And I was hoping to hear a little bit more about this. And I realize it's not enough time here tonight, but do you address that in your book? And because my hope is, and I have seen a lot of people in my own family also who have severe issues with anxiety. And it really can go to the point when people kill themselves. And saying, take a deep breath, it's not cut it. It's not going to cut it. So I'm not a psychologist. I'm still on the search. I try to help my neighbor and my friends and my family. And I really was hoping to get from here a little bit more deeper help without getting a therapy session, you know.
Yeah.
So
If somebody's on the road to, suicide, then that would require serious intervention.
Yeah, I know. In the acute phase, yes, there is medication, there's therapy, but overall, you mentioned. I honestly, I'm convinced. If people have clinical anxiety, it comes from somewhere in the past, from a deep injury. Mm-hmm. But the question then is, how do we fix this? Mm-hmm. And the pill is not, it can help temporarily, mm-hmm. right? It can bridge an acute phase so that people do not kill themselves. Mm-hmm. But long term, in my opinion, it's only prayer, and there are certain strategies to do that. And I really would like to hear more from somebody's experience because I really believe Jesus is the only real fix for this, and not any pill, and not therapy can help, but it cannot be the final solution, and it has never been. Why are we in the situation like we are now? The world has not gotten better in that, So that was my question. If you have more advice in your book, more from the spiritual side.
Yeah. Well, there is a whole chapter on trauma, so yeah. So, but if you wanted to address that, but it is always linked with our faith. Like that is the point of, like the point you made. Art made the point about science is not opposed to our faith at all. And the thing that's so interesting to me is how many of the things, the recommendations that the saints, that's why I started out with the saints, the recommendations they made about how to deal with their anxiety, that is actually corroborated by good science. It's corroborated today. Of course, they knew it back then, but taking a slightly different look at it. So I feel like our approach is a combination of faith and reason. Would you agree on that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to say anything?
Yeah, no, I think that we're trying to bring some, bridge that gap a little bit. Just not just telling people, we're not just telling people, oh, take a deep breath, do this deep breathing, like
right.
that's where you start, mm-hmm. like that's from that sort of the physical standpoint. But yes, of course, mm-hmm. our faith is the foundation for all of this. And I think that's part of the, why do we do this hard work? Why do we do this hard work of trying to live, of facing things that we are fearful of. And our faith, I think our faith gives us the reason why mm-hmm. we keep going.
Exactly.
Why
mm-hmm.
do we keep trying to fight this demon of anxiety? Because for some people, the anxiety that they experience, it's not just, like a few bad experiences that we've had that, It can be linked to some really deep wounds, and those that we can't walk through that by ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, I think it requires our faith,
Yeah.
but we can't do our faith alone either. We need community. We need people with us. We need the church, and we need our brothers and sisters in Christ, and because we can't do it ourselves. I think that's one of the things that our society is very much failing at, is like we are trying to do it ourselves, you know. The first step is, you know, like, okay, therapy and medication, which are not bad things. They can be helpful. They can be life-saving tools, but they're not the be-all, end-all.
Right.
And I hope we say that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah.
Our last question over here.
Hi. So sometimes I find myself convincing myself that my anxiety is actually a gut instinct that I should follow instead of something that I should actively work in calming down. Do you have any advice on how to discern between the two?
I mean, I think like von Balthasar, for example, he was saying we should banish all anxiety except for the most proper form of it maybe is fear of the Lord. That he does present that you know, the fear and awe that we experience in the face of the grandeur of and mystery of God. But he does think Christ came to you know, help us transform it and, you know, not to suffer from it.
Yeah, so definitely if we're suffering from it, that's probably
Yeah.
a sign that it's not like, you know, like our gut. I think I think that there's something to be said for, you know, listening to our gut, listening to our intuition about things, but it's listening, not just obeying blindly. And I think that might be the difference, because anxiety wants to be obeyed blindly. We fear this, run.
Yeah.
What we want to do when it comes to something like, you know, like there's something like this guy that I'm seeing, like there's something off about him, you know, we want to take a step back and go, okay, I'm noticing this feeling in my gut, but what is that feeling? What might be driving it? Am I seeing red flags in him? Is it the way he said that thing, like, kind of hit me a little bit off? Or like, am I like afraid of commitment, you know, and afraid of making the wrong decision, you know, so it's all about, you know, we notice that fear, but we're not just reacting. We want to hold that fear long enough that we can sit with it, that we can examine it, that we can start to ask questions, become curious about it. I think one of the best ways of combating our anxiety or whatever we're feeling is to become curious about it, because curiosity, wonder, like, okay, like, you know, the anxiety is telling us to leap out a window, but like, okay, I wonder, like, what's going on here? Where is this coming from? Like, is this my gut instinct telling me, you know, don't take this job that I've just been offered, you know, or like, is there something about it that's off? Like, okay, maybe the company, you know, like has, like maybe in the interview people were giving very strong, you know, no work-life balance vibes. Or am I just really afraid that if I take this next big step, I might fail? So we want to figure out, you know, like not just that feeling in our gut, but what is it saying? And then, you know, if that's fear that's driving me from something, like, I don't want to be ruled by fear. How do I step into that? What am I supposed to be stepping into here? Because fear, the more we listen to it, the smaller it makes our world, because it tells us, no, don't do that thing. That thing's too dangerous. And the next thing we know, we are stuck.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.